Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this information session focused on the call for proposals for the National Data Spaces Pilot. If you require French interpretation, please select your preferred language channel from the Zoom settings bar. Closed captioning is also available. And this session is being recorded and will be accessible on the Alliance's website next week. So throughout this presentation, we encourage you to engage with us using the Q&A feature. If you have any questions, simply type them into the Q&A, and that should appear at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, you might need to click on the 3 dots beside the word More to access it. Type your questions into the Q&A, and we will address them at the end of this brief presentation. If we receive more questions than we have time to answer during this live session, we will compile responses to all unanswered questions and add them to the FAQ section on the page for this program on our website. So before we dive into the details of the call for proposals, we'll take a moment to review our code of conduct and welcome attendees from across Canada. We do have a code of conduct that guides our gathering today. The Alliance seeks to provide a welcoming, engaging, and safe community for everyone. Discriminatory language is not appropriate in any venue or platform. The Alliance does not tolerate harassment in any form. Harassment is understood as any behavior that threatens another person or group or produces an unsafe environment. Thank you for being here to listen and learn together. My name is Dawn Wood. I'm the Director of Program Management and Administration at the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, or the Alliance. I'll be one of the Alliance staff speaking today. And as I address you today, I do so from the unceded traditional territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I invite you to join me in respectfully acknowledging the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis lands we all work and live on. So just a reminder to please use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your Zoom window for your questions rather than the chat. If we're unable to answer all questions during the session, we'll follow up afterwards. I'd like to introduce some of the additional Alliance team members who will be speaking in today's presentation. Felipe Perez Ivostov, Director of Strategic Development and Initiatives. CJ Woodford, Research Officer. And now we'll shift our focus to the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to touch on the background and context of the call for proposals, an overview of the National Data Spaces Pilot, some details of the call for participation, a few points about the application process and timeline, and then the floor will open up for Q&A. So next, Felipe Perez Ivostov will provide some background and context. Felipe?
Thank you very much, Dawn. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm really delighted to present today some of the work that has been done and answer any questions that you may have in terms of participating in this pilot project. This is something that the Alliance has been really thinking and really engaged and excited in moving forward as part of the broader vision that the Alliance has for the Canadian Research Data Platform, an ecosystem where we bring really together really all of the domains, all of the services, and all of the tools that are available right now in an integrated and interconnected way. As a reminder, this is really a pilot where we want those participants in the program to help us move things forward and brainstorm with us and identify the best ways to advance this. We're really looking to develop trusted, community-led digital ecosystems for research data, and so we're really looking forward to work with you. This initiative is funded as part of the Canadian Sovereign AI Compute strategy from the federal government. And the vision behind this, as I mentioned, is to really create a cohesive, interoperable Canadian research data ecosystem and specifically focus on domain-specific national data spaces in this case. So one of the objectives or the goals of this program and this pilot in particular is to facilitate your communities to mature towards a national data space in different aspects that my colleague CJ is going to be talking about. And we really want to work with you to identify what is required to create, in the Canadian context, an interoperable pan-Canadian data ecosystem. Therefore, the pilot is really a cornerstone of what I mentioned, the Canadian Research Data Platform. Really briefly, the objectives of this pilot are to establish and support your communities to develop research environments that are organized and operational around specific domains and scientific and scholarly communities. We want to work with you to develop inclusive and practical frameworks for these national data spaces. We want to really put the communities forward and advance with you the development of standards, governance models, and practices for data management, reuse, and security, acknowledging that in many instances, you guys are the experts, you work with that data, you understand the requirements around it better than anybody. We also want to bring together Canadian efforts with international best practices, both in open scholarship as well in data sovereignty, and always remembering interoperability. And of course, we want to enable long-term collaboration between research communities and national research data management services provided by the Alliance. And although we all see the benefits of participating, I think it's important to really make it clear that what we're trying to do here is really create an opportunity for you to work with your communities to bring all of this into fruition. We want to identify common research needs and co-development opportunities. We want to advance best practices and standards for your research community. We want to support you in doing so. And we want to inform the development of national data spaces as a mature program and its requirements in the future, again, within the Canadian context. We want to also provide a venue and a place for different communities to share and connect and provide feedback on how mature and how to create these data spaces. And finally, we're also looking for creating working groups in the future that would inform certain elements that we think are relevant within the Canadian Research Data Platform. So participants in this pilot will be invited to lead some of this work in collaboration with the Alliance. With this, I'll pass it to my colleague CJ, and who will walk us through the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Felipe. And thank you everyone for coming to our info session today for the National Data Spaces Call for Proposals pilot. I'm going to walk you through a little bit on what the proposal actually is requesting of you and what you can expect as you pull together those pieces. So I think the first and foremost thing is who can apply? What's your eligibility? So before I get into the little bit of the nitty-gritty who can apply, this is intended to be an application on behalf of an institution or a collection of institutions that come together as an applicant. The lead participant really needs to be an eligible Canadian organization that falls into one or more of these bullet points. So are you a Canadian university or post-secondary college education institution? Are you a nonprofit organization that's carrying or capable of carrying on research or part of the DRI ecosystem? Or are you a data repository that, either is one of those other things or is a standalone piece? So that lead participant organization would need to be one of these four or more than one of them. And there are intended to be other participants in that application package. So this isn't intended to be for one organization to come forward and represent everybody in the research community, but for you to work together as your research community or pulling together your research community to create one application. And I will say that even if your other applicants or your other participants don't fall under one of these eligible criteria, they are still invited to be part of your application. They can be partners, participants directly, or folks that you are working with throughout your proposal. All right, next slide now, Felipe, sorry. So that's who can apply, and again, institutional applications. What can you put in your proposal towards a national data space? So what we're thinking of with national data spaces is that there's a lot of foundational work that needs to go into really bolstering the research community to then be able to create a national data space. So this is a multi-stage piece of work. And there are sets of eligible activities that we are looking to fund. I will say that this is not an exhaustive list. There's opportunity in the application form to say, the things that we see that need to be done for our particular scenario and our particular research community fall outside of these. And that's okay. We encourage you to really think about what's feasible and what's needed. But some of the things that we've identified that might help guide your proposal and help you get the thinking started include community engagement. So bringing your community together via those stakeholder meetings, workshops, and consultations, identifying shared priorities and needs, communication and outreach. Governance and policy, so identifying, implementing, and sustaining the appropriate governance structure for your research community. That could be at regional levels, at national levels. Identifying those key principles and policy requirements like Indigenous data governance, fair care, OCAP, and more that might be discipline specific. Security and compliance, things that involve identifying and developing shared solutions for regulatory compliance and security needs. So thinking about maybe sensitive data needs, or if you have high security needs because of the nature of your data. Sustainability and business planning, identifying and implementing the appropriate approaches for ensuring sustainability after the pilot or during the pilot even. So this includes sustainability of not just financial, but also your knowledge and resource maintenance too. Capacity and skills, identifying gaps and needs for training for different roles in the research community and what skills are needed by your researchers now and also in the future as you develop new programs and resources for them and how your research community might work towards meeting those needs. Standards and interoperability are identifying what those existing needs are for standards in the research community. So data models, metadata standards, the works. You might want to identify, part of that work could be identifying what already exists in terms of international or national best practice, as well as identifying what might be specific to your Canadian need or your regional need for your research discipline. So we're not telling you how to do that, but this is for you to determine on your own through your proposal. And then lastly, integration and technical bridges. So what exists in your community in regards to what's needed and working towards interconnecting and interoperating services. So really building those technical interoperability bridges. And then development of actually testing those proposals and those solutions. Testing, evaluating, and refining the use cases and pilot programs, and then recording and publishing those for sharing within your research community so that you have a good lessons learned protocol, but then also with others that are looking towards building a national data space. We're going to go back to the eligible activities quickly, Felipe there. I do want to say that these are the eligible activities that we'd like you to focus on. You do have the opportunity to say other if you identify other things, but the one thing that we really can't fund as within this CFP is things related to hardware. So indirect costs, overhead, and the purchase of digital research infrastructure, equipment, maintenance, and repairs are out of scope. We do have other funding calls, however, that are happening right now that do address those needs. And so we strongly encourage you to go look at those and apply for more than one. Applying for other CFPs or even our RAC RPP process does not disqualify you from this proposal. And in fact, it would those are positive things. It's showing that you're really looking at a holistic approach to what your research community needs. But we can't fund that directly through the Data Spaces CFP. And I will say, if you are working through your proposal and you're like, I think that there's activities that we need done that aren't in this list, and I'm not sure if they're eligible, please ask questions either during this info session or afterwards through our email processes to make sure that those are answered. The last thing we want is for you to not submit a proposal because you're not sure if it fits, or to submit it and we need to go back and forth for information. So please ask questions early and frequently. Next slide, please. So within these activity categories, we're asking you to determine where you are right now within your research community. So doing a bit of a self-assessment, and then also thinking about where you'd like to be by the end of the funding period for the proposal. So we've developed a maturity model that helps you kind of put yourself in, where am I right now and where do I want to be in the future? The maturity model does go into extensive detail in Appendix 2 of the CFP document. So if you're really looking for those nitty-gritty details, I encourage you to have a look at that. That's where they live. And we do kind of describe the levels 1 through 5 as what would this look like as an entire organization, but we don't expect any research community or organization to have one maturity level across all the activity categories. What we believe is probably more likely, and how we've set up the application for you to work through, is that you are determining your maturity level for each activity category. Each layer of activities is going to have a different maturity level. And then you're able to say, we're at a level 1 for, say, governance and policy, and we'd like to be at level 3 by the end of the proposal period. And this is my proposal plan to do so. This is how the maturity model should hopefully help you. We are, however, asking in the application process that when you do your self-evaluation of where you are right now across these different activities, if you're mostly entering level 1 and level 2 for the activity categories, you would likely be identifying yourself as an initial maturity research community. If you're mostly entering levels 3, 4, and 5 as maturity across the activity categories, you're largely going to be in the established maturity level for research communities. This is not a good versus bad thing. It's just giving an idea of, are you initial or established? And the reason why we're making that differentiation is because we have different scoring rubrics for initial maturity research communities and established research communities. This is to help normalize the scoring process, because we do not want it to be that we only fund one maturity level or another. We are looking for a diversity of recipients of this funding. So the main thing here with the maturity model is to be comprehensive, transparent, and honest in your self-evaluation and what you think is feasible to put in your proposal plan as you move through maturity. Next slide, please. Funding envelopes. So we have a total of $3.15 million that can be spent between when we're hoping to start spending the money in January 2026 and the end of the program, which is in March 2028. We provide 2 different funding envelopes for you to apply to, 500,000 to $1 million and 250,000 to 500 million, or 500 million, not, sorry, wow, 500,000. And the reason why we split up those 2 funding envelopes is, again, it's not better or worse. It's a way for us to do some internal sorting and fitting together the applications as they make sense. But then more importantly, they were as a guide for how you can apply. What we were trying to illustrate is that it's not better or worse to say I'm applying for the maximum amount of $1 million versus what's reasonable for my research community in this time frame that we can reasonably do is more at that 400,000 level or more at that 500,000 level. So we really wanted to emphasize that it's okay to apply for a little bit less if that's what's reasonable and within scope for your research community for this program. The funding envelopes and your maturity level do not impact your scores, other than we use 2 different scoring rubrics for the maturity levels. Please go with the funding envelope that makes the most sense for you. We are not picking ones only in one or the other. It's purely based on your merit and your score for your application. We will be choosing at least 3 recipients based on the top scores. So there's going to be at least 1 recipient that's an initial maturity research community and at least 1 recipient that's an established maturity research community. Because we're expecting different amounts of funding being requested, then we expect there will be at least 1 other recipient. There could be a couple more recipients. It really depends on what it looks like with the proposals, and after we score them, who's the top scorers. Felipe, next slide, please. Perfect. Proposal submission. So we will be checking for completeness of each application. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out. They're going to be accepted in both official languages. So we encourage you to, if you're working mostly in French, please go ahead and submit your application in French. You don't have to translate back and forth. And similarly for English, you don't have to translate to French. They do get submitted through our SurveyMonkey Apply platform, and the link there is on the slides, and you likely would have seen that as well on our website for this. And they are expected to be submitted no later than midnight Pacific on December 1st. That is a pretty hard deadline. We can't do any extensions on applications, even though I know that would be preferred, but we have to cut it there because we do need time to give appropriate peer review. Next slide. Proposal content. So what do you actually include? And I've already kind of spoken to what you can expect to include, especially when it comes to the activity categories and the self-evaluation of the maturity across them. But what I want to highlight here is that some sections have more content than others. So definitely keep an eye in your application on the word limits and the optional material that you can attach if you're finding that the word limits don't capture what you need. The very first thing we ask for is the proposal summary. That's your abstract. Give us a good overview of what you've submitted. That helps us determine how to organize which reviewers get which proposals, and if you're initial versus established and all that sort of thing. So that's your abstract that goes in. Your description of participants is who is actually submitting the proposal, who's the lead, who are the other participants that are coming together as this applicant, who else in the community is kind of involved but maybe not coming towards, not coming forward as a participant necessarily. And we encourage you to, as you're thinking about this, to really reach out to the research community, reach out to the folks that you work with, and get them to come together on your application. The more comprehensive it is, the stronger your application will be, because it's more of a landscape review of what your research discipline looks like in Canada. So the more comprehensive you can be, the better for you. The current community is where that self-evaluation of your maturity level lies. So that's where your self-evaluation of your maturity is for your research community, your level of interest. So letters of interest, examples of how your community is interested in coming together, is interested in creating a data space, those arguments, and how to facilitate them, as well as what pieces of a data space you might already have available in your research community. Communities of practice, what platforms and research software you're using, as well as infrastructure. So this gives us an idea of how ready your research community is and you as the applicant are for leading this work. Proposed activities are where you base on your self-evaluation of where you are now to say, this is where we'd like to be if we get funded at the end of the pilot. You don't have to move all of the activity categories the same amount. There's guidance in the application for what we recommend for initial versus established research communities to aim for. And it is really up to what you see the need is in your research community. So it's very open with some guidelines in there to help lead you on what that looks like. And the maturity model itself has some really great and fulsome examples of what those activities could be to go from one level of maturity to another within an activity category. The proposal plan is really those brass tacks of you're taking what you'd like to accomplish and moving and advancing your maturity levels across these activity categories to what are your milestones, in what timelines, and what are the risks associated with some of those pieces. So that's where you're really getting into the nitty-gritty details of your proposal plan. And then, of course, the budget. The only thing I'll mention about the budget is that we do ask for you to be transparent on what other contributions you might be receiving or you might have applied for some of these for some of these activity categories. So if you've already applied for funding to host, say, community workshops, it would be good for you to put that in here, because that might explain why you're not asking for budget for community workshops in this application, because you already have funding from somewhere else. So the more transparent you are, the more comprehensive you are, the more we can more fulsomely and holistically assess your application. Because we're not going to be necessarily going out and diving around for a lot more data. We really are depending on you to include what's relevant in your application. Next slide, please. All right, so and then how do we evaluate it? So we have 5 evaluation criteria that are weighted. These are really strongly founded in previous CFPs, as well as our RAC RPP process and scientific review process. We're going to be looking at the scope of the maturity self-evaluation. Did you touch on all of the activity categories, and did you provide good justification for them? Is there good research community interest and applicant suitability? Did you hit all the major players in the nation? So if you're applying from genomics and you want to create a genomics data space, is Genome Canada one of your participants, or at least listed in some of your documentation? That sort of thing. The feasibility of the proposal, which is a really large chunk of the weighting here, is what you're asking for something that could actually be enacted over the 2-year-ish period, a little bit less, or a little bit more rather. And on the other side as well is what you're asking for too easy or too simple or not comprehensive enough for what could be accomplished in that period. So again, it's up to you to determine what's reasonable for your research community and trying to hit that sweet spot of is it feasible, but then also is it impactful enough, which is the second part of this, and also worth quite a large portion of the weighting. Impact, of course, is it going to be how impactful is this for your research community as well as the Canadian research ecosystem? And then the value for money is that balance between all three of those last evaluation criteria. Is this a good use of this funding? We will have a mix of external and internal peer reviewers for enabling these evaluation criteria. And what I mean by that is we're going to have folks within the Alliance and from the research community at large help peer review these applications. We are going to be splitting the rubrics into initial and established, so everyone's rated on these evaluation criteria, but the expectations for initial maturity and established maturity are different because those are at different maturity levels. So each group is going to get a shortlist, and then we'll do a comprehensive review with those two shortlists from the two maturity levels at the end to say who actually gets part of the final recipient list. Next slide, please. Great. And lastly, the timeline. So the applications are open. I encourage you to open SurveyMonkey, apply, open an application, have a look through the questions, read through them, figure out what you would like to ask us. If you do have any questions for us on what's eligible or why we're doing things a certain way or clarification, open the application, have a read through, think about what you want to do, and make sure you ask those questions by November 21st. That's our deadline to submit questions to us for us to answer them in a fulsome way, because we do also need to post them back onto the website in our frequently asked questions portion. The deadline is December 1st at midnight Pacific time, and then we'll be starting our review process very shortly thereafterwards and in through the middle of January. We're hoping to have the notice of awards go out in mid-January-ish. There's a couple of final review pieces that need to be placed there, so that's why we don't have a specific date, but certainly we would like to have those funding agreements finalized with the lead participant of the successful applications by the end of January or earlier. So it's a very tight timeline for review and issues of awards. And we're hoping to make sure that we have as many people encouraged and empowered to apply as possible. And so with that, I'll pass it back to my colleague, Dawn, to close us out of the presentation portion of the info session.
Thank you, CJ. Just want to add a reminder that all applications must include an official signed letter of certification from the institution, and that can be uploaded onto the online application form. You will be prompted to do so, so it'll be clear that you need to do that. The Alliance website has a page dedicated to this call for proposals, and on that page you can find the call for proposals, the link to the application portal, the FAQ Q&A, which is a living document. We will add to that as questions come in. I don't think it's on the website now, but after this session, we will be adding it. And there will also be slides and recordings of this info session that will be added next week. If you have any questions that come up after this session, please email them to us at fundingsubvention@alliancecan.ca. And now we'll move to the Q&A, which will be moderated by Felipe Perez-Ivostov and CJ Woodward. Sorry, CJ.
That's all right. And I will also introduce some of our colleagues that are here today that may also jump in to answer questions. We're joined by Graham Jensen, who's a research officer as well. We have Marshall Gunter, who is our research and technology liaison. Marianne Wilk-Lesage, who's our director of architecture. And we also have Lee Wilson, who's our director of RDM services, but I don't see anyone else from the Alliance who kind of volunteered to answer questions right now. So apologies if I missed anybody. So I think for us, we wanted to start first with questions that had been submitted by email and just kind of voice that what the answers to some of these questions were. And we tried to even answer them a little bit during the presentation. So I will take the first one, and then Felipe, if you want to take the second one in that document. So one of the questions we received was regarding initial versus established research community, does this classification have any implications for which funding envelope the applicant can access? If not, could you provide guidance on your expectations for each envelope? And so that was, and so there is a formal answer that's up in the FAQ for this one, but ad-libbing a little bit, no. If you're regardless of the maturity level of your research community, you can apply for whichever funding envelope you think is most reasonable. It really comes back to what do you think you can accomplish in the time frame, and what do you think is both feasible, impactful, and creates good value for the money that you would be requesting. There's no tie between maturity and funding envelope. And the only reason that we have the funding envelopes is to emphasize that it is okay to request less money than the absolute maximum. It doesn't ding you in terms of your evaluation. Your evaluation is purely based on the merit and the evaluation criteria presented previously. So that one does have a formal answer on the FAQ as well, but happy to answer any follow-ups there. And then Felipe, the other question was, will the choice of funding envelope affect evaluation? I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about that one.
No, I think you've answered. I think it's really
Yeah.
just for internal purposes.
Yep. All right, so we answered both at the same time. Sorry, folks. And then I guess we'll turn over to the Q&A. Yolanda, Donna, are you guys telling us which questions we should go for, or should we just answer the ones that we've picked out?
We can start from the top to the bottom, if that makes sense.
Sure. So I'm gonna look at the Q&A, and the first one that I see is from Catherine Jardine. For eligibility, if you fall within multiple categories, is there any preference for selecting one over the other? And I think this is actually a question for Dawn or Yolanda. I think that it's okay to select more than one, but I'm not sure how SurveyMonkey is set up for that question specifically.
Oh, yeah, I'll check in with Yolanda, but I believe we probably, SurveyMonkey Apply is probably select one. Is that correct, Yolanda?
Yeah, and I believe there should be an option like another, other, and then there is a text box. So if you are not comfortable to choose any one of them, you should be able to type in choose other and then fill out the text box.
Okay, so the recommendation is if you fall in more than one, you should select other and say all of the options that you fall into. Don't just choose one.
I think that's a good idea if you want to let us know. I think it would depend on the situation. Maybe if you're sort of an institute within an institution or something like that, and you just want to say you're an institution, we just want to ensure that you're eligible and get an understanding of the categories that applicants fall into, because we will subsequently read the details of your contact information and your proposal.
Okay, good. So Catherine, let us know if that doesn't answer your question. But it sounds like there's no preference, but definitely you can give us as much or as little information in that regard as you want. As long as you're eligible for at least one, then you're good to go. All right, so say that one's done. So from Jen MacArthur, would a lab/large academic industry consortium based out of a Canadian university be a suitable applicant? So again, this is more of a programs question. Dawn or Yolanda, what do you think?
Well, also back to you as well, CJ and Felipe and team. It's a consortium, and I don't know if industry falls into the eligibility requirements.
If it's based out of a university, it should be.
Sorry, Felipe.
Sorry, I think Magali wanted to say something.
No, sorry. I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay. My understanding is that if it's based out of a university and that is the hosting institution, it should be eligible to receive funds. What is not eligible is to send those funds to industry partners, unless they meet the eligibility criteria that CJ described.
Right. So then I think for Jen's question specifically, Um, the answer would be the Canadian University could be the lead participant, but the actual consortium that's an academic industry might not be the best choice as a lead participant, just because you want to make sure that your lead participant is fully eligible. They can be a participant, though, in the application, just to be clear. All right, Jen, I saw your hand went up for a second and then went down again. So let us know if that wasn't a
I
sufficient
was
answer. We're happy
trying
to
to give a
discuss.
thumbs up. I was actually more
Oh.
just looking for, is this the kind, it is let out of a university. It's,
Okay.
it just, we have a lot of data, but it's for a specific project. So and it's specific lab and it's a specific, like we were a purpose-driven organization that's been set up for a particular kind of research. So the question is that relevant? I'm sorry to keep asking. I just want to make sure if not, then that's great. We won't apply. But if we are, like, I just want to make sure that this is actually the kind of people you want to be funding.
Jen, again, as long as the application comes out of the university that is hosting this, you should be able to receive the funding. What you can't do is share that funding outside eligible participants.
Okay, good. So moving through the questions, and we're going to try and answer everything today. So bear with us, folks. We're going to maybe pick up the pace. What does a national data space mean in the context of this call for proposal? That is an excellent question, and it's one that so there's two answers. The first one is a national data space would be a formally recognized discipline-specific body, and then also the abstract layers of that body that enable data sharing between participants in that research community. A little bit abstract, but it would be kind of all of the things that are required to enable data access, discovery, and sharing and use. There's the backend part of this, which is the research community, and that's also maybe where the activity categories are a little bit more well defined. But then specifically, what are the boundaries of that and the limits of that, and who can participate and who can't? We are actually depending on the recipients of this call, as well as everyone who wants to engage in these discussions on what does a national data space look like, to please engage with us through focus groups and the working groups that we're going to be announcing shortly, as well as to even sign up as a reviewer for this call, if you're not applying, to help us define what that means. So this is part of the work that the recipients will do together with the Alliance, is to come up with what are the boundaries and the onboarding materials and the positioning of what a Canadian national data space looks like. So we're giving a little bit foundational material, and then we actually want to develop it through the pilot with the recipients.
And maybe just to add on that, CJ, we also see it as a process by which a community works through the maturity model and reaches a certain level of maturity and has certain characteristics that are going to be defined. There will be a level of maturity that switches from a disorganized or maturing community to what we actually would call a national data space. Now, with this funding call, as CJ mentioned, we're trying to identify what would be the threshold, at what point that becomes a national data space.
So thank you for the question, anonymous participant. All right, from Marie Mahoney, along the same vein, to what extent can international colleagues be included in the proposed research community? Thoroughly and actively, I think, is what we want to say there. We would really love to see applications that are already looking at that international collaboration piece, and especially international interoperability. Your international colleagues, so institutions or consortia that are in Europe or in other jurisdictions, are not eligible to be subcontracted through the lead participant for funding. So again, they can be a participant on the proposal, and you can highlight how they contribute and some of the activities they'll work with you on, but they won't be able to be receiving funding through this particular CFP with you. But we highly encourage you to be working with them and to include them in your proposal writing. I think that's a great idea.
CJ, could I just add, I think international collaborations and integration with international partners becomes increasingly important at higher levels of maturity, less so as initial, because we're looking really at creating this Canadian ecosystem. So obviously recognizing the importance of international partners nonetheless. Thank you.
All right, great. All right, and from Jen MacArthur, some of those complimentary calls already closed earlier this week, and will they reoccur next year? And do we anticipate a future national data space of CFP? So these are all really good questions. Unfortunately, we can't say whether or not that will happen at this time. It is conditional on further funding. We can say that some of the one complimentary call that I can definitely point to is the RAC RPP process, which opens every year. That doesn't close until a little bit later in November. The exact date escapes me right now. So that one is still open if you're looking for infrastructure in particular. Felipe, I don't know if you wanted to mention a little bit on anticipating future national data spaces calls.
Thank you, CJ. And thank you, Jen. I think it's important to say that the funding call for research software AI enhancement, that was a special funding call. We will be trying to receive additional funding, but at the moment we're not guaranteed. However, for the National Data Spaces pilot, we are trying to demonstrate the importance of having funding calls like this, of organizing the community this way, and therefore demonstrate the need for further funding on this issue. So we're using it as a way to demonstrate that we need continuous and sustainable funding for data spaces.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Next one is from Brian Corey. Is it a negative for a discipline-focused data space to have an international focus rather than a Canadian focus? And specifically thinking about the last bullet on the eligibility slide. I think it's similarly to international collaboration is something that would be excellent to see in an application and is something that's encouraged generally. I'd say no, it's not necessarily, but keeping in mind that this proposal is thinking about building a strong Canadian foundation to then have better international relationships with. So I don't think there's any issue whatsoever in saying the ultimate goal is to have strong international collaboration and for it to be part of an international ecosystem. I would encourage you to include that framing in your proposal plan. That's an excellent way to go about it. So definitely not a negative. Do any of my other Alliance colleagues have things they'd like to add for that one? All right, I don't hear anything. Brian, let me know if that's if you have other things to say about that one. Mark is done in the interim. All right, and so I am going down this list, by the way, folks, based on when the question was asked. So we're answering the earlier ones first, and then we're getting to the later ones. So from Catherine Jardine for the self-assessment of the maturity model. For the data spaces with multiple partners, repositories, and software systems where each partner varies in maturity level, should we be thinking of averaging maturity level across all partners? That's a really good question. So this is intended to be a maturity self-evaluation of your research community, which would be all of your partners working together. This isn't intended to be overly granular or cause you to lose sleep at night in terms of how precise your self-evaluation needs to be, but it should consider all of those aspects. And so that should be then, if you're saying there's multiple people that kind of contribute to this one activity category for my research community, some of them are a little bit more mature, some of them are less mature. I would encourage you to think about it as how do all of these different pieces work together? And then what does that maturity look like? Because the point here is that we're building research communities to then establish these national data spaces. So a little bit of an averaging of maturity levels, but maybe specifically thinking of how well do they work together across those different partners for that one activity category, and then that's the maturity you should provide. Again, don't lose sleep over each specific maturity line. Get it as within as a reasonable estimate as you can, and if all your participants agree that you're working on the application with, that looks about right and the justification makes sense, then that's perfect. Watching for hands for if anyone has anything else to add here. So if not, I'm gonna keep going. Suppose an organization was literally tied at 4.5 and for 3 to 5, oh, okay. Would you recommend classifying as an early or mature organization? So there is guidance. That's a great question, and we did think about that too. Felipe, do you want to answer this question?
Yes, and
Okay.
so I just want to make maybe just before, okay, I know where you're going, CJ. So maybe just a preamble. So the maturity model is really for communities. It's not for for one organization necessarily, unless that organization already represents the community itself. And we do know that there are certain organizations that do that. But in reality, this is more about the community itself. And so there may be multiple organizations within a community that need to be part of this data space. And then all of them should really self-evaluate. But that being said, CJ, maybe I'll pass it to you on the more technical considerations.
Yeah. So Felipe's point stands as well. But then even if that's the case, so for all of these organizations that are coming together as an applicant, they still come up with a tie. Do they classify themselves as initial or do they classify themselves as established? So we do provide more specific guidance in the application form to kind of help you make those calls. So first of all, when you're thinking about your maturity level across the activity categories, if you're kind of like, this might be a 2 or this might be a 3, we actually encourage you to round down. Because if you're not sure, then that likely means that you're sitting in between. It means that you really need to establish that lower level of maturity first before then you jump up too high and do things too fast, right? So we recommend that first. And if you still end up being tied, then how we've identified it is if you have, and it's the average that you want to look at across them. So if you have a maturity level overall, averaged overall your activity categories of 0 to 2.9, then you would be initial. If you have an average just overall your activity categories of 3.0 to 5, then you would be established. So I voiced it as if you have most of them as 1 to 2 or most of them as 3 to 5, then you could determine which one. And that is still the case. That's how averages work. But if you literally take that number, that average number over all your activity categories, you will end up with something along the scale of 1 to 5. If it's 3 or more, then you're established. And if it's less than 3, then you're initial. And so I hope that makes it a little bit more clear and easier to determine. Okay, next question on here. Miriam Morandi asks, how was this maturity model tailored to the Canadian data space context? Is it adapted from an existing international framework or developed in-house? And so I will say it's developed in-house, and the person who really led that work was Marshall. And so Marshall, I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit about how you brought the maturity model together.
Yes. So the maturity model overall is based on other maturity models that are in use and have been used internationally. And mostly we looked at the European Union and how they have progressed their data spaces projects over the last decade. And we have also looked at the Japanese implementation of the same project. The Japanese is a little more focused on industry. Europe is a little more balanced. And another one that we consulted greatly was the Australian research project in data spaces. And theirs is a little bit bent more towards ours on the research project, on the research side of things. And once we did this evaluation, we looked at the different pillars that they were all based on. So you will see those in the different columns, and came up with the grid and the maturity matrix that we did to try to cover, all the different aspects that were present, and then put this in a Canadian context, focus it more towards the research community and such, which is where we were wanting to begin. And that is the 1,000-kilometer view of how the maturity model was developed.
Thank you, Marshall. And CJ, if I may just add, so if you look at the matrix that Marshall was mentioned, you'll see a reference to integration with national data services like Further and Lunaris. So those were the aspects that we looked at. But I also want to emphasize something that maybe hasn't been mentioned before. It's not on our call for proposal. We know that there's a lot of reference material and organizations that are already supporting data spaces in a variety of ways. We are looking at the implementation within the Canadian research context. So we are looking at partnering with the International Data Spaces Association to have access to their documentation and reference materials so that we can share with the pilot projects and really start working in a way that is really standardized and based on international best practices. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Felipe. And I might additionally say that Marshall really did give you the 1,000-kilometer view because it was months of work for him to pull together that maturity model and then for us to pick it apart and post a piece back together again. Not only does it refer to the national services we have in Canada, but also some of our national priorities in regards to fair care, OCAP, Indigenous data governance, and sovereignty. Those are specific pieces that do have a Canadian focus that we made sure to put in there, as well as some of the models that are of use for developing aspects within these activity categories. And the activity categories themselves are based on what we see needed in the Canadian context. So we will continue to work on it with the recipients and other folks that want to help us develop what national data spaces look like throughout the pilot. But that's kind of how it all came together and then how we drafted that to begin with. And thanks for the question. That was a good demonstration of the work we did there. Next question from Jen MacArthur. Can you clarify how the rubrics change based on initial versus established research communities? I.e., can I share an actual rubric so that we understand more specifically where and how the scores for each are weighted or calculated? So that's a good question. I cannot share with you the rubric right now because we are still developing them. But what I can say is that in the application form and also in the CFP document where it lists the application form, it's very clear on the expectations for initial versus established research communities. Not all the questions are going to be very different between the two. As you can imagine, for example, the description of the participants isn't all that different. You are expected to tell us who you are, regardless of what maturity level you're at. But the level of granularity and intensity of some of the justification pieces, especially for the self-evaluation, will change. So for example, your level of community interest, what we would expect for an initial research community is more future-facing. You might have letters of intent, maybe draft plans that are in place, that sort of thing. Whereas for an established research community, we would expect to see a little bit more like maybe you have conference papers that have been published between organizations that show that they're willing to work together, or you've already got partnerships that are established that help with some of that community engagement, peace building, and so on and so forth. So there is more detail for each specific question on the expectations for initial versus established in the application form itself, as well as in the CFP document. The weighting between the evaluation criteria, however, is the same. So the weights between the 5 evaluation criteria for initial and established do not change based on your maturity level. The expectations for how you might get the full points in each weighted criteria based on your maturity level are slightly different because we want to normalize it between initial and established. So that's what changes, not the actual weighting. I hope that answered your question, but if it doesn't, please let us know. I wish that we had been able to publish the rubrics with the CFP, but as I think everyone maybe can appreciate, things had to move quite quickly to make sure this was out in time for applications to be drafted. All right, I don't see any hands up from my Alliance colleagues to supplement the answer. So next question, what is the scoring based on? Does submitting a national application from an existing Canadian research network consider an advantage for potential of adoption?
Maybe we can get back to Basile with an answer. This may require some internal discussions.
Yeah, so we'll loop back to I think I need to think a little bit about what you mean here. So we'll go to the next question there. Jen MacArthur again, for participants, can we list a consortium as a whole or as a participant rather than naming the individual members? Ooh, that is a great question. Felipe, I might pass that one to you. What do you think there? Consortiums participants, or we need to list individual organizations?
Well, I think it's related to maybe one of the initial questions. We do need to have a lead applicant that will receive the funds on behalf of that consortium. And that applicant must meet the eligibility criteria. Beyond that, I would leave it to Dawn whether it matters or not how the other participants are defined.
Thanks, Felipe. Yeah, as Felipe said, when you enter your information in the application form, we will need to know which institution or organization is applying to receive the funds, because we are going to enter a funding agreement with one organization. So I'm assuming that you must have a consortium that has a really long list. So maybe if it's too difficult to enter every participant, you could upload a document with a list to, or explain it in your I don't know how long the list is, explain it in your in another field. But we would like to know at some point, at some stage in the application, we would want to know the membership.
That sounds fair. Right, so thank you, Felipe and Don, for that one. From Frank, if an applicant requests 500,000 in funding, is there a possibility that the review committee may recommend a lower funding amount? And so, Frank, yes, it is possible that that if you are a final recipient, you may be offered a lower amount than you requested, regardless of what funding envelope you're in, actually. And this will be purely up to how many applications end up getting top scores. If we have a lot of ties and we're looking at, going down through all of the flow charts of contingency plans for how to fund folks and how to decide and how to make tiebreakers and that sort of thing, it may be the case that we offer less funding than what was requested to do some of those tiebreaker decisions. So hopefully that may not be the case, but it is a possibility. Okay, so from Victoria Lemieux, are there any federal government identity and security standards that we should be aware of and mention in our proposal? That's a great question, and it's one that I would say is up to your research community to identify in the proposal drafting process, because otherwise I think we might be giving you a heads up or a leg up on your evaluation. But this is the kind of work that we want to see in the proposal plan. And it is the kind of work that the Alliance is very keen to facilitate with the recipients and those working in the data space field. But in terms of me saying one in the info session right now, unfortunately, not that we can name. But I think that it would be really pertinent if you don't name them to say that you have a plan in your proposal plan to identify what those are and how you're going to go about that work. Sorry that that's not the answer you were looking for, but I hope that that's helpful. Right, from Etienne, would a network of Canadian museums and university collections that publish their data through an existing data publication portal be eligible for this funding program? Thinking about, I don't even know how to say that organization word. Canadiennes. Thank you, Felipe. So I think, again, we've kind of seen similar questions. There does need to be a lead participant that comes together with the other participants as an applicant to that can actually receive the funding. So that's the first thing. So the second part is it a research discipline? And can it form a national data space for a specific research discipline, which is how we're identifying data spaces right now. And if both of those answers are yes, then I think there's no problem with that. Canadian museums and university collections, I think, would certainly be excellent participants, but you would just need to make sure that you fall with somewhere in that eligibility criteria and that there is a lead participant that can receive funding.
And just to add, I would believe that Canadensis is also eligible under data repository.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's still associated with the Université de Montréal, but if it is its own thing, it would still probably meet the eligibility criteria. We just need to make sure that you guys have enough capacity to actually administer the funds. But yes.
Great questions. And then also from Etienne, can the program fund services that we are already offering but have no financial support for? Or does it need to be used only for the development of new services? no, it does not need to only be used for the development of new services. It can be services that you're currently offering, especially for things where you've been going from contract to contract or grant to grant. This is intended to help kind of solidify that. But also mostly looking at new things that help advance maturity and kind of formalize those processes if they're informal right now. Felipe.
Thank you. Just to add to what CJ just mentioned, the other aspect of this is that some of the activities or expenses that are not eligible are related to infrastructure. However, as part of the Canadian Research Data Platform initiatives, we are launching later in 2026 what we call the Distributed Storage and Compute Grid, and we will make available some of that storage infrastructure for data spaces. So we're still looking at the use cases and how we would use it. But that infrastructure will be made available at some point for specifically, let's say in your case, Canadensis to host that data potentially, right? So we're still looking at those avenues of how to support successful applicants.
Thanks, Felipe. And I might just add here that the only exception to kind of offering for services that don't have financial support already is that it should relate to one of the identified activity categories, or if you have an other activity category that you've identified for your research community that's in your application, it should loop back somewhere to those. Things like overhead and these sorts of things that don't really relate to your application would not necessarily be eligible. We'd have to do more of a deep dive on that. But certainly anything that's directly related to the enactment of those activity categories and advancing their maturity and establishing their sustainability, which is a big one, would certainly be eligible. And the examples here, by the way, I skipped over them for shortness, but the examples are important. Helping publish community data and maintaining community engagement, exactly related, absolutely within scope. Jordan Watson. Okay. Should scalability of this proposal scope and budget be included in the proposal? E.g., if not fully funded, you could reduce the scope by X to remove whatever. Or will requests for a scaled back budget be requested after the review process? That's an excellent point. So I think that we will, of course, review your application based on the amount that you actually submit that you would like to have. And ideally, we will be able to fund you if you're the final recipient to the amount that you've requested. If you do have in mind, like, even if we don't get the full amount, this is how we'd like our budget to be scaled down. I don't think there's anything wrong with including that information in some of the additional information pieces in the budget. I wouldn't fill out a whole other budget template for it, but certainly you could include some of those indicators in the narrative part of the text. But if we were to offer you a lower amount, that would be a discussion between us and you as the recipient at that point to say, where does the budget actually go and how are you going to revise it? So having a plan B in place or telling us that we do actually have a plan B in place is helpful. It wouldn't impact your score. It wouldn't impact the merit review process, but I think that's helpful for your planning, definitely. Right, from Jordan Hoffman, our research data is collected across Canada, but mainly is stored on cloud servers versus physical server infrastructure. Is it okay to have a focus mainly on digital research infrastructure that is collected and accessed across Canada? So to be clear again, the procurement, maintenance, repair of digital research infrastructure is out of scope for the CFP. So you certainly wouldn't be able to focus on DRI procurement for this one. However, if your question is more so, does the impact of us having cloud versus physical infrastructure matter in terms of the merit of the evaluation criteria, then no, we fully expect different research communities and data spaces to have different infrastructure and architecture even. We've seen that internationally as well. Everything requires to have, everything has different needs, and you will have access to different resources. Felipe.
I think it's really important that the consideration for this funding call is really not about advancing individual projects or individual platforms. It's to really bring communities within a discipline or a domain together and identify what is the shared approach to move forward, increase interoperability, adopt shared standards, provide support for their communities. So please don't take this as just an individual project-based program where a platform will receive funding to advance something. It's really to bring the community together. So please just use this lens as you work through it and as you bring your partners together.
Thank you for the question. From Maureen Mahoney, can organizations submit more than one application? Especially if it's a Canadian university or post-secondary institution, I think that's expected. So yes, absolutely, organizations can submit more than one application, but they should be really clear that the different applications are for different research communities. What we will be watching for is if there are multiple applications for the same research community. So multiple applications for oncology, multiple applications for establishing a data space for genomics, multiple applications for establishing data spaces for astroparticle physics and things of this nature. Like we will be watching for that. Not as a downside, but as a way to say, can we encourage these folks to work together if they don't already know about each other? So that's one thing I would say if it's an organization submitting more than one application is that they should be for different research communities. Because if they're not, then the organization should catch that beforehand. But other than that, I think that's partially something that we do expect to happen, especially across the different research communities that are going to come together across disciplines. I don't see any hands from my Alliance colleagues on that one, so thank you, Maureen, for that question. Adriana, what about an initiative that is primarily provincial in scope for now, but has the potential to expand or serve as a model for something national down the road? So I have an answer to this question, and then I'll look to my Alliance colleagues to see if there are different interpretations. But I would say that if you have something that's largely regional, so in one province or in one area of Canada at the moment, but there is likely a national need, or there is likely a national research discipline that's going to be served by that. I think that's absolutely worth a proposal and something to submit as an application. But what I would encourage you to do is to see, are there actually any other organizations or initiatives that do exist in the other provinces, even if they're really nascent, even if they're just individual research groups right now that are starting to look at this, that you can partner with to showcase that there's a national need. Impact is an evaluation criteria, and we are going to be strongly considering what's of great impact to the Canadian research ecosystem. So there is a balance there. It's totally fine for there to be future-facing considerations for what impact and need can look like, especially for something that might be new or a new interdisciplinary initiative. But have a look at the other provinces to see if there is other folks working on a similar area or on the same area. But I think that is fine for it to be, say, if the lead participant is the only formal structure or formal organization that exists right now, that's perfectly fine for them to submit the application as a representative for the national interest. I don't see hands from my Alliance colleagues, so I think we're in agreement. From Larissa, our project involves an existing international collaboration. I'm leaving out the details, Larissa. Sorry, I'm skimming through for the pertinent parts. So you have a project that has existing international collaboration. Could you clarify how international cooperation and data flows across borders will be evaluated within the National Data Spaces pilot, particularly regarding eligibility, data sovereignty, and the use of non-Canadian research infrastructure? This is a good question, and so I want to highlight that this isn't project-based. So the National Data Spaces is about representing a research community and working towards a data space for that research community in Canada that then could interoperate, say, with other data spaces internationally, or could have international connectors, is how we might call them, for data spaces. So it is really intended to be not project-based, but research community. What does the whole research community for a particular discipline need? And your discipline can be as granular as you think is required for this kind of application, by the way. So if you do have international collaboration, but more specifically to your other points on how it's going to be assessed, international cooperation is a good thing, I think, in regards to national data spaces. So that's not something that would be a drawback. It would certainly impact your standards and interoperability and community engagement activity categories. So highlighting it there is where I could see it coming out immediately, but that's up to you as you write your proposal, where you think they make sense in terms of the activity categories and your self-evaluation of your maturity. It doesn't make you ineligible. Again, as long as there's a lead participant who is one of these eligible organizations, then you're good. But your international collaborators cannot be subcontracted through the application. So they wouldn't be able to access the funds from this particular program, although they could benefit from the services you develop through the funding from this program. Of course, we're not saying that international colleagues can't access the data space. We're just saying that the data space, the folks that stand it up need to be eligible Canadian institutions. Data sovereignty and the use of non-Canadian research infrastructure is, again, up to your particular research community and situation. Data sovereignty is going to have different levels of need and consideration for different research disciplines. And that is something that you'll have to come together with your colleagues and your other participants in your application to determine where does that come out and how important is that and what are you going to do to ensure it? That is part of your proposal plan. Use of non-Canadian research infrastructure, I think that won't be a downside. There is no eligibility criteria for is it sovereign for this call. So that won't diminish your score, but certainly thinking about data sovereignty and governance is a benefit and something that I think is well captured within the activity categories themselves. All right, so I think I caught your question, but let me know. There were several questions embedded in that one. So Larissa, let us know if we didn't get that one for you. Thomas, a question regarding the submission process. Which form should the CVs take and where are they to be uploaded? Dawn and Yolanda, do you want to tell folks how SurveyMonkey Apply looks like?
Sorry, I was working on other questions. What is the question again? Sorry.
So from Thomas Stroh, regarding the
Right.
submission process, which form should the curriculum vitaes take and where are they to be uploaded? And I might say first, I don't think we're requesting CVs. So we're requesting all kinds of documentation to help supplement your self-evaluation and give justification for parts of your plan. But there is actually no curriculum vitae because it's institutional applications, not PI. But where does that look like for them to be uploaded, Yolanda?
I think also while Yolanda's looking that up, maybe I'd have to scroll through the appendix. We might be asking for a description of the team and expertise, but I think that if you want to include your CV, it would be at your discretion of what the format would be. And I'll let Yolanda describe where it could be uploaded on SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey Apply is the name of the platform.
Yeah, I think so. I'm also looking at Appendix A, Appendix 1, and I believe it's under Section 2. So it should be the second form, the second task listed on your application. So the platform is now open. You're welcome to create an application and see all the tasks, and you will be able to see what questions are listed in each task. And I believe this will be fall under Section 2, description of participants, and where the flow of the task would be very similar to Appendix 1. And most of the upload tasks are optional. But about the CVs, if I would believe it will fall under experience and expertise, and you will be able to, there should be an upload button for you to upload PDF.
I agree, Yolanda. That seems to be the most appropriate space, but we don't specify that you have to submit a CV. So it would be how you want to share the information for this question about describing the experience and expertise of the team.
If people have a CCV, please submit a CCV. Others who may not have one, please use whatever format it's more convenient. Given that this is not a requirement, I think that should be fine.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. All right, so from TRSI Hub, can you please elaborate on the value for money metric? And and then some questions here as in, is it valuable for the research team or the broader research community or the institutions in general? And what kind of cost benefit analysis to show value? So that's a great question. So the value for money is for the Canadian research ecosystem. So how beneficial is it going to be for your research community for these particular budget lines to go towards what you've suggested they go towards? So it's really for, is it a good investment for the Alliance to fund this for your research community? Are we getting a reasonable return on movement towards a national data space for your research community? And is it reasonable to expect that it's going to be cost effective for moving the maturity in the activity categories that you've identified in your proposal with the money that you've requested? So again, we don't have the full rubrics available to share today, but it is essentially based in, do you have a clear and justified operating budget? And is it aligned with the available funding envelope? So are you saying that you can do this for $1 million, but when we open it and we see that you want to have 8 national community organizations and 5 people hired and services on top of that, that's not reasonable. That's not a good value for money because we know that you're not going to be able to meet those milestones. And that's a really extreme example. We won't be doing super nitty-gritty financial assessment, but that kind of high level thing will be something that we are looking for. Is it clear and justified? Are you paying folks a reasonable amount to some degree? We know for certain organizations that there's a minimum that you would need to pay, for example, a data steward or a research associate, if those are the kinds of jobs that you're looking to hire. And then the cost effectiveness of it is having 4 national community meetings in 2 years a reasonable way to move forward the maturity level that you want across activity categories. That kind of thing. Are the types of activities you've decided to do also worth the money to move the maturity forward? So I will say that different parts of the application are considered across the different criteria. It's not that only the budget is considered here. It is really the proposal plan and the budget and how those two link together that we consider the value for money. I will also highlight that, again, if it's clear and justified and you have a clear proposal plan that links to your proposed activities, this is a relatively straightforward piece. The more important parts of the weighted that are more highly weighted as well are the impact and the feasibility. Those are the harder questions that we do really want you to answer. So TSR, I hope that's clear enough without having a rubric to show you, and apologize for not having that rubric to show you, but that is really what we're looking for. Is it clear? Is it justified? Can we make a clear connection between the proposal plan and what you're asking for in that budget? Okay, from Larissa, our project team is based at the University of Alberta, but includes international partners from Ukraine, from Czechia, and Canadian collaborators. Since the applicant must be an organization rather than an individual, could you clarify how our team should structure the application? Should the University of Alberta apply as the lead applicant or lead participant on behalf of this international consortium with partners formally listed as participants under our coordination? You got it. Exactly that. So keeping in mind, again, that this is for national data spaces, not to serve individual projects. It is intended for your research community. But certainly if the University of Alberta, in this particular case, is a main hub for this particular area of work, then it could certainly make sense for the University of Alberta to be a lead participant. They would certainly fall under eligible participants. And then your international collaborators could also be listed as participants, just being careful that they are not folks that you're subcontracting through for this particular call. Again, they can work with you on the services that you want to do and the activities you're looking to move forward. And they may benefit from the activities that you move forward through the CFP, but the nature of the funding and the nature of our contribution agreement with ICED, where this funding comes from, is that you wouldn't be able to subcontract with these international partners directly. So I hope that answers your question, but that's a great one. So yes, you could absolutely come together as an applicant with the University of Alberta being the lead participant in that applicant. Francis Jeanson, for established platforms, are you interested in applications that seek to develop broader technical/governance capabilities and ecosystem services and support? Or will you also consider equally applications with specific narrow technical/data improvements focus? So that's a really good question. And this does sort of come back to, what does your research community need right now? You have, 8 activity categories that all have very different activities that are within them. They're not all going to be at the same maturity level for your research community, and there is a question on which ones do you raise the maturity on the most versus less, based on the need of your community. And so I think for this question on, is it broader or more narrow, I think it makes sense that if you already have a high maturity on some of these activity categories, and you're only looking at moving them up one level, like say you're already at a level 3 and you want to move it to level 4 because you want to do more work in other areas, focusing on more of those specific requirements to move it up into level 4 certainly makes sense. And that would be, a big part of your feasibility and impact assessment. If your community only needs to do very fine-grained improvements, that may impact your evaluation because, let me rephrase this. If you only need very specific or fine-grained improvements, then that should be considered as part of your proposal plan to say we're applying for maybe less funding to get those implemented. You would still get weighted the exact same way as everyone else. It would be the question more so on, if you're asking for a significant amount of money to have only small improvements, then that comes into the impact and value for money evaluation criteria consideration. So that's really up to you to say, what's needed by my research community right now across these activity categories, and how do you maximize that feasibility, impact, and value for money evaluation criteria in your proposal plan. Again, by looking at moving forward the maturity across all of the activity categories. Some of them might be very small steps, but what we would expect likewise that some of them might be very large steps, especially for established research communities. So yeah, not a negative either way, but just thinking about how does that relate back to feasibility, impact, and value. All right, for this one's from an anonymous participant. Given the eventual goals to have interoperable data spaces across different domains, would you encourage applications to refer to or collaborate with applications from other knowledge domains that use the same technology and semantic stack? Oh, that's a great question. So we encourage collaboration regardless. I would say that there is all the same way that there's a danger of applying for funding for a particular project. There's also, which is too granular, there's also a danger of applying for too broad of a research community. Like say, you want to create a data space for the entirety of physics or the entirety of humanities or the entirety of natural sciences even, or humanities and arts. That's too broad. There's too many needs to meet in that kind of really broad boundary line. So I would say that it's excellent for you to collaborate, and participants can be participants in more than one application. There's nothing wrong with that, but they should be for different research communities, certainly. But showing that you're working with other groups and that you are doing knowledge sharing and you are doing lessons learned between each other, and you're, sharing that kind of expertise, I think that's something that would be very valuable in demonstrating that your research community is coming together and you are learning from each other. Definitely. Felipe.
Thank you. So I think, thank you for that question. Part of the work that we're trying to do with this pilot and the data spaces program in general is eventually, as you mentioned, create interconnectivity, interoperability across domains. We recognize that given the length of this program, it's going to be really difficult to focus on that. So I would really encourage those applying to really look at your communities. And part of the work that we will be doing in this program is look at those opportunities to work with other domains.
Thank you, Felipe. And I just want to highlight that the info session is only going for another 5 minutes, and we do have 25 unanswered questions. So I think this might be a good opportunity for me to remind folks that we will save the questions and try and get back to you as much as possible. If you've entered them as anonymous, I will put them in the FAQ. We'll figure something out. Yolanda, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll compile all the questions and do a Q&A document, and we'll post it on our website. So yeah, this will be hopefully next week. We'll get everything sorted and put it on our website.
Before we go, can I just say, so we just published our draft site for the Canadian Research Data Platform, where you will be able to see upcoming events, more information about the activities that we're hosting. So I'll just post it in the chat. So just use it as a reference. It's going to be continue changing as information is available. But if you're interested in participating, please keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Felipe and Yolanda. I will try and answer another couple of questions before we have to go. But for anyone that does need to leave early, thank you so much for coming to the info session. Don't hesitate to send additional questions to us by November 21st. That's when we are no longer, I guess, taking questions really for this Data Spaces CFP. It is due midnight Pacific time on December 1st. Please go ahead and open the SurveyMonkey Apply application, open the document, have a read through, have a look at the questions. Think about if you do want any clarification on anything before November 21st, because we do really want to make sure that we answer your questions and you feel confident in your application. I know there was a couple of questions here specifically about the evaluation process and the evaluation rubrics. These are top priority, like right now. So if you do have additional concerns or questions about the evaluation rubrics, the criteria are already published in the CFP and the weighting is in the CFP, and there is more detail in there. But we are hoping to provide more information, especially around that evaluation in the coming few days or business days. So please don't feel that we're not interested in answering those questions. We are, we just don't have it just yet. All right, so for those that have to leave, thank you so much. I'll see if I can answer one or two more before we get to 1:30 Eastern time. Let's see. Okay. So from Francis, can non-academically affiliated nonprofits apply to this call? Felipe, it looked like you were starting to type an answer. Do you want to say it out loud?
Thank you. So we do have the eligibility criteria. So as long as you're capable of conducting research, as long as you're based in Canada and really meet the criteria, we're not necessarily only working with purely academic institutions. But if you have any concern, please just send us an email and we'll verify it for you.
Thank you. And so I do see a couple more here that are about the process for how it's going to work with giving funding and that sort of thing. I'm going to maybe emphasize one of the ones that was from that was posted in the chat. Is it critical to have co-applicants spread across Canada or could come from one Canadian university? It is definitely a benefit to your application to showcase that there is some national positioning or thinking, that you are working with folks from across Canada, or at least from a couple of different provinces with the intention to serve a national research community needs. So the participants and the application, the participants coming together as the applicant and the application itself can certainly come from one Canadian university, but there should be clear evidence in your application that you're working with or you're looking at getting participation from other groups in Canada. Again, this is not a project level CFP. It is intended for research communities in Canada as a whole. So again, thank you for all of your questions. Yolanda will track the other 20 that we didn't get to today. So thank you for asking the questions. We'll be posting them as soon as we can. And then again, November 21st is the deadline for asking questions just by email. Open that SurveyMonkey Apply application so that you get a good feel for it so that you can ask those questions before the deadline closes. And I'll hand it back to Dawn to close us out, I guess.
Thanks, CJ. Thanks everyone for coming. I think it's all been covered. We will race to respond to all of the unanswered questions. Some questions I noticed were typed and answered already in the answered column of the Q&A. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to connect with us if you have any further questions. Does anyone else from the Alliance have anything to say, or shall we sign off?
I think, yeah, that's the end of the info session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.